Tonight is a really momentous night because it was about 4 months ago, I think, when we started this journey. And I'm happy to have so many people here all the way throughout and all the way to the end of trying to ask a central, pivotal, crucial question in Jewish life. And that is the question of Torah study. We know, we demonstrated it, everyone knows this. This is the story of Jewish history, that the Jews have been and always are and have been obsessed with Torah study. And the question that we set out to try to answer, and the riddle that we came to try to unlock is why? Why are we so obsessed? And I'm actually doing the mathematics, I'm counting, and this is the 11th lecture that we've had on this issue. So this is going to be the 11th and the final on this issue. And we're going to move on to kind of delving into the actual nuts and bolts. But I thought it was prudent, before we get started what Torah actually is, to start with a question that's maybe not asked as often, and that is, why are we studying Torah with such commitment over such a long period of time? And of course, once we satisfactorily answer that, then I think if we haven't done that yet, we'll hopefully get to that tonight, or we'll continue to try to satisfactorily answer that question. We're going to move on to, okay, so we know why we study Torah, but let's break down what it's about. What do we know about the authorship? How do we know that this is untainted, uncorrupted, that it's the same Torah that we got from God? Because remember, if it's not God's Torah, it's not 10 commandments, it's 10 suggestions. And also kind of delving into the real nitty-gritty, kind of the advanced questions of oral Torah, written Torah, Talmud, their interrelationship, really trying to understand what it's all based upon and how it all works. So I want to start with a reason why we study Torah, which, you know, it's something that I feel very dear to my heart, and I think it's a legitimate idea, but maybe the less exposure we've had to Torah study, the harder it will be to appreciate it. When we study Torah, what's the model? How do we go about engaging with the Torah study? We start with the text, we start with the content, and then we try to integrate that into our minds and, of course, hopefully into our behavior, into our bodies as well. And I think what's unique about Torah study is that we're not hesitating about the content itself. It's as if the content is fixed, the destination is set in stone, and we need to try to navigate to see how that makes sense. What do we mean this like this? Well, I spent many years in yeshiva. And in yeshiva, you know, you go and you walk to the yeshiva, you see students, each opening up a page of Talmud and screaming at each other to the blue in the face, trying to understand what's going on. And the question that's never asked is, what's going on, and was this a mistake? No one ever entertains there's any mistakes, because it's the Torah. And even the Talmud, you know, we have thousands of rabbis collaborating over hundreds of years, the most intelligent people that ever walked this planet. And every word was edited and re-edited, like everything's there for a reason. When we study the Torah, it's a lot of reverse engineering. And we start with a fixed statement. And then we say, wait a minute, there's a lot of obvious questions. What's going on? And there's a joy and a delight to try to reverse engineer it, to try to take it all apart and try to put it back together in a way that makes sense. And to me, this kind of sheds light on what Torah really is about. You know, we have a touch point in our lives, potentially, with God. And we spoke about this prior, but because it's God's Torah, it's God's mind. And sometimes we start off and it says, gosh, there really are so many problems. This doesn't make any sense to us. And the sensitivity that we have as Jews is that we realize that the reason why we don't understand Torah is not because of Torah, rather it's because of us. And we have to try to reformulate the way we understand things, try to come up with ideas to try to make it work and make sense of it. I'll give you another example. Sometimes in science, you have a reality, but you have no idea why that thing is true. But you know it's true. It's observable. It's objectively true, and there's a joy to try to understand it because it starts off as being so contradictory. I think that I've spent a long time studying the works of the Rambam, and what's interesting about the Rambam's works, maybe we'll get to it a little bit later on, is that he doesn't give you any sources. So the Rambam was the first to write a book that distilled all of the halacha, all of the practical Jewish law out of the Talmud. He was the first to do that. Obviously, very innovative idea, to try to organize the laws, just the conclusions of the Talmud, and not on the page. It's not going with the order of the Talmud. Rather, he had a new reformulation of Jewish law. The order was his own. But not only that, he doesn't give any sources. So he says a law, and he doesn't tell you where he got it from. Anywhere in the Talmud, and anywhere in the Mechilta, and Sifra, and Sifri, and Torah's Kohanim, and all the Midrashim, and all the works of the luminaries that precede him, anywhere could be where his source. And there's a joy when we study a page in Talmud, and I say, let's look what the Rambam says on this particular matter. We find the corresponding Rambam, and we have two documents in front of us. Our Talmud, our Rambam. And we have no idea how is it possible that the Rambam, the genius of geniuses, the Renaissance man, the greatest man of the past millennium, the great genius who was able to do so much, works of immortality, the first one to write commentary for the Mishnah, the first one to organize all of Jewish law. How is it possible that he read the same page of Talmud as I'm reading right now, same words, and he comes and this is his conclusion? It seems so bizarre. And you look at some of the commentaries that are contemporaneous to the Rambam, and you see how they explain it, and you're like, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense. Well, what is the Rambam thinking? What's going on over here? But you know for sure that this is something that he wrote, and he only wrote it after he was absolutely abundantly sure of what he was writing, and he edited it over decades. This is for sure but what's going on over here? And the destination's set, and your job is to try to, retrace his steps. It's as if you could take a walk and a journey with the mind of the Rambam and see how he gets to where he gets to.
What's the possibility that he sourced it, but he didn't release it?
So the Rambam writes in a letter that he wanted, at the end of his life, he wanted to write the sources for all his works. He started writing it, he didn't finish it. His son, we know, Rabbi Abraham, the son of the Rambam, who was a great scholar of his own right, and the only reason why he's not as famous as he would be is because he's the son of the Rambam, and thus we kind of look at him, he grew up in the shadow, and anyone who grows up in the shadow of the Rambam is going to pale by comparison. But he wrote a book that we don't have anymore. We have people that have referenced that book, but he actually spent a majority of his life defending his father and his father's works, and thus he actually wrote that book that we would have loved to have, and we don't have that. But I've done this. There's more books written on the Rambam than any other book of its era. There's thousands upon thousands of commentaries on the Rambam. And one of the reasons why it's so delightful to study is because you really have an open canvas, because he doesn't at all tell you how he gets there. So you have the sources, you have his conclusions, and then you have this joy to try to connect those two. And I feel like it's more. What I'm saying is this is more of like a process. It's a process of engaging with information, and it's a certain joy and exhilaration of trying to understand.
So is everybody that came after him agree with him?
Oh, absolutely not. Not everyone that was around at his time. Not everyone, of course. But that's the nature of Torah study. Torah study.
So
There's
why do we depend on him?
Well, we depend on him. We don't depend on him as the last word, but he is the bedrock of halacha, because even his detractors agree that he wrote halacha like no one else, and even the ones that argue with him, they argue with him out of reverence because they recognize his scholarship. That being said, there are certain instances in which we do not follow the halacha like the Rambam, and it's actually the problem that the Shulchan Aruch came to solve, because the Rambam tried to write the book to end all argument, and essentially he engendered more arguments than any other book.
So you're referring to the Mishnah Torah?
The Mishnah Torah, that's right.
Okay.
So he wrote Mishnah Torah, and then comes along to the Rush 100 years later, another contemporary, I guess in the same era, and he writes also a book of halacha.
But only 4 books compared to the...
Well, no, he wrote it on the page of the Talmud, and then you have the Tur, who also wrote his work of halacha. So then you come 500 years later, and the Ram started something, he kicked off a trend, and before you know it, there's many, many other people, and they're not all the same. So to synthesize that and to take positions, that's what the Shulchan Aruch came to do, to navigate that whole realm of scholarship, and to try to find a way to come with one consensus. At least, he had his methods, and some people maybe question his methods.
So in this current day, do we have one halacha that we follow?
Well, the halacha became more and more granular. So yes, there's one halacha that we follow, but there is granularity to it. There's also customs. So there's the Sephardic and the Ashkenazic custom. We know that Shulchan Aruch was written with the accompaniment of the Ramah, who was contemporary to Rabbi Joseph Cairo, and they both set out to write the same thing, and they ended up having a different method of navigating all these halacha works. So imagine you have 500 years of halacha works, and now, okay, we want to write one definitive one. Once that era is sealed, let's write a definitive work of halacha. So he set out to do it, and he chose essentially majority rules, the Shulchan Aruch did. He took the major halachic opinions and chose majority rules. So he kind of took the consensus of the Rishonim. And the Ramah, he took the one of recency. Because recency, within a certain era, if you're more recent, you have the gift of reflection upon those that preceded you. So the Ramah, his method of trying to navigate this problem, which is really a blessing, right, of having so much halacha, was to take the later opinions, because they essentially are able to reflect upon the opinions of those that preceded them, and to give a primacy to those opinions. And that created this dynamic where sometimes there will be a divergence between the opinion of Shulchan Aruch and the sister work, which is the Ramah, and typically the Sephardic communities follow the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ashkenazic communities follow the Ramah when there's disagreement. But point out, the disagreements are kind of very minor. So I'll give you an example. We know that there's bread and there's sub-breads with regards to the laws of Jewish blessings, correct? When you eat a bread, it's a hamotzi, special blessing hamotzi, that we make on bread only. Then you have a pretzel, which is basically the same thing, but it's a different blessing. You have a piece of cake and it's a different blessing. And the question is why? So the Talmud talks about this bread and sub-bread. And the question is, how exactly, to what extent do we have to add sweeteners to bread to make it from bread to sub-bread? That's why the Sephardim, they don't have egg challahs in Shabbos. Sephardim don't have egg challahs in Shabbos. Why? Because they want to have, because in the Sephardic opinion of this matter, following the Shulchan Aruch, is that if you put even a little bit of other non-flour water ingredients into the bread, it's going to downgrade it from being bread to sub-bread. You make them zonus in it. That's why they only have water challahs.
Interesting.
Dave.
I thought when collectively we study halacha, we study Rambam. Am I saying?
Well, yes, but that's not...
And I understand, he's the authority though, right?
Well, he is the authority for some communities, like, for example, the Yemenite communities, they accept his word as being the final word in halacha. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, he's not the final word in halacha. He's maybe the first word, maybe the authoritative word in halacha, but not the last word in halacha.
Well, maybe not the last, but the most authoritative would be Rambam.
Well, Jewish communities really everywhere unanimously accepted the works of the Shulchan Aruch, and we know historically, whenever there is this shift in eras, and thus a shift in Torah, and then there's one work that's accepted by, universally amongst all Jews, that becomes like kind of the standard bearer. So what made the Talmud the definitive work of Talmud, of Gemara? Because everyone accepted it. What made the Rambam? What made the Shulchan Aruch the definitive word? Because everyone accepted, because everyone knew there was a job that needed to be done. He essentially filled a role that someone would have had to have done it, and he was at the right place at the right time with the right skills and capabilities to do that.
But where does the Rambam disagree with Shulchan Aruch?
Most of the time they don't disagree.
But is there some disagreement?
Yes, there's going to be instances where the Shulchan Aruch does not follow the Rambam.
Like what?
Gosh, there's probably hundreds of them, because the Shulchan Aruch took a much more kind of exhaustive look at halacha. So he would look at the Talmud. So he would look at the Talmud, and he would look at all the commentators of the Talmud, and he would, of course, invoke the opinions of the Rambam.
So we would have some idea of what's at stake here.
An example. Off the top of my head, it's hard to think, but for example, the laws of Nida. As to the Rambam, he has his own opinion, top of my head, right? As to what renders someone a Zava Gedola. And he's the only one who has this kind of 7-Eleven opinion where he talks about a woman who sees an emission 7 days later and then 11 days later, and he's the only one that says that. And he's essentially on an island with regards to how to understand this very complex Torah law. And Allah does not follow him because he's kind of a lone wolf or a lone opinion on that matter. Top of my head. Sorry, it's the first thing I came up with. But there are...
Shulchan Aruch doesn't require that 7 and 11?
No, it's not a matter of requirement. It's just a matter of understanding what renders someone a Zava Gedola. Okay, just an example. But I'm sure there are hundreds. But most often there's not going to be disagreements, and if the disagreements, once again, they're always very minor.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Go ahead.
All right, those people, those that followed, you said that the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah did not cite his sources.
That's right.
Did everyone else that followed with these works that you mentioned cite their sources?
So many
is
of
he
these,
the only one? That's
many of
question
these,
number one.
yes,
Question
go ahead.
Number two is,
Go ahead.
did he do that deliberately so that people would have to go back and study and look?
Okay, so I'll start with question number 2. The Rambam did it deliberately, I would say, even though later on he regretted it. He did it deliberately because he wrote a work not of scholarship. It ended up being a work of scholarship. But ironically, if you read the introduction to the Rambam, and I highly advise everyone to do that because it's available online. Just Rambam introduction to Mishnah, not Mishnah, Mishnah Torah, because he has an introduction to Mishnah as well. If you read that introduction, he outlines a very interesting history. Like he does a very good job of succinctly giving us the history of Torah and the events that propelled him to write a definitive work of halacha. But he writes it with a reflection on the status of scholarship in his time. It used to be everyone was capable of studying all of Talmud and had the capacity and the intelligence and the community to be able to glean from the Talmud halacha. Nowadays, it became more difficult and people became more scattered and became less conventions of scholars, and the scholarship waned, and therefore people don't know halacha. So therefore, I, the Rambam, I studied this all intently, and I organized the halacha for you. So it's not a work of scholarship. And ultimately, it became a work of scholarship. So ironically, what the Rambam set out to do, in a weird way, historically, he didn't achieve that. But he did even more than that. Because he laid the groundwork for all the future scholarship to come. So he wrote a work for lay people. And he wrote a work for lay people. Lay people don't need to be bogged down with instructions. Just where does it come from? They weren't even studying. The reason why he wrote it is because they weren't studying the Talmud. Why would you tell them where the Talmud came from?
They didn't care.
So,
they just want to know what to do.
Exactly. So that's probably why he didn't write the sources. As to your other question, no one really kind of has that. None of his contemporaries had that same bold initiative to say, we are writing down a definitive work of halacha for lay people. Thus, many of them, their sources are self-evident. For example, the aforementioned Rush, not on this list, but one of the great luminaries of the medieval times, of the Rishonim, who wrote on halacha, he writes it in the order of the Talmud. So it's very easy to find where his sources are because his sources are on the same page that he's writing on. So on page number 1 of the book of Brachos, he'll have his, he'll go in the order of the page. So you just follow the Talmud and you could go and see what the Rush says in order. Others have written down sources and some have not as well. But but the Rambam, remember, he was also a very innovative thinker, very creative, an independent thinker, and he would sometimes say things that on the surface seemed to be in direct opposition with the Talmud, and like I said, that makes a tremendous grounds for Torah study to try to understand what's going on. I cannot tell you how many people have written books that dedicate their lives to studying the Rambam. And typically you'll find people that themselves are geniuses who feel like there's a challenge that we don't find elsewhere in Torah, or at least not in that same realm, that is implied by studying the Rambam, because of the fact that so much of what he's writing is the sources are unknown. And that kind of is a special challenge that a lot of people feel motivated to try to unlock.
So has there ever been an estimate of Maimonides' IQ?
I don't know. I don't know if there's been an estimate of Maimonides' IQ, but I would encourage you to just get a scope of what he accomplished in his life. Just a quick introduction. At the age of 15, he grew up in Spain, in Cordova, right? At the age of 15, his family and many other Jews in Spain were kicked out of Spain with threats of execution if they don't convert to Islam, because of the radical Islams, the Almohads that captured Spain at that time. He fled to Morocco, to North Africa, with his family, and despite finding temporary refuge in Morocco, the Almohads eventually captured Morocco. So at the age of 15, him and his family, they lived in mountains in northern Morocco, in the Atlas Mountains, for 9 years. When he moved to Egypt at the age of 24,
Became the doctor of the king, right?
well, he became a doctor a little bit later, but at the age of, later on. But he published the first commentary on all of Mishnah. Could you imagine being a 15-year-old and writing a comment and living in caves and writing a commentary on 63 books of Mishnah that hadn't been done before? Mishnah's already around for 1,000 years, and no one was able to do that. And the Rambam, a teenager living in tents, does that. And not only that, it's not just a commentary on Mishnah, it's really a commentary that invokes all of Talmud. And he has the gumption at the age of a teenager to say, I will organize the 13 principles of Jewish faith. Can you imagine? Something that no one's ever even thought of doing prior, to say, let me organize the core principles of Judaism into 13 immutable principles, that these are principles, and these are necessary beliefs of all Jews, these are not others.
Where did he get his medical training? Or did he?
Well, all doctors of those time were self-trained, so... but we know we have works that he wrote on medicine. Like it's unbelievable what the man accomplished, and that was maybe the top two most influential books that he wrote. So just as an idea. Either way, I would encourage everyone to get a sense of that. Maybe we'll talk about that. I want to make sure we finish this tonight, because I want to get. We'll dedicate a class to analyzing the Rambam and his impact and his legacy and the scope of his literature. Okay, we study Torah, and we create new worlds. What does this mean? So I want to start with Adam. Adam had Torah or not? Did he have Torah?
Whatever he was there.
So Adam, on one hand, is a man of tremendous capacity. The descriptions that we have of him in Jewish literature are astounding. He was able to see from one end of the world to the other end of the world. He's able to rival the angels. The angels see him and prostrate themselves because they think he's God.
Did he have Torah once he ate of the...
No, he didn't get Torah. That's right. Well, so Adam had what's called Ruach HaKodesh. Adam was made of the image of God. Adam was able to understand every creature, what its essence was, what letters God used to create it, and thus give it a name. Adam is essentially all of human intellect merged into one.
Taken down by one.
Yet he was still lacking. What happens? The serpent comes and tells him, "Oh, the Almighty told him not to eat from the tree. Do you know why the Almighty told you not to eat from the tree? Because He knows that you're going to be like Him." So Rashi explains, what exactly did the serpent tell him? The serpent told him, "You eat from the tree, you'll become God's rival. God creates a world, you will be able to create a world as well." So Adam, peak humanity, the one thing he was lacking, the one thing that he coveted, was the fact that he was not able to create worlds. Fast forward 2 chapters of the Fathers, chapter 3, Mishnah 14. The Jewish people are beloved because the tool, the wonderful tool was given to them. That the Almighty gave us the wonderful tool that He used to create the world. We know the Torah has often been described as the blueprint for the world. There's a very famous teaching in the Zohar, Istakel Bo'oraisa Ubara Alma. The Almighty looked into the Torah and created the world. Well, Jewish tradition says that the Torah preceded the world by hundreds of generations, according to the Talmud in Shabbos. Now what that means, of course, is a good question. But the Almighty used the Torah to create the world. And who did He give the Torah to? To the Jewish people. Thus, what Adam coveted, what we have. Adam had everything, but he was lacking one thing. He was lacking the ability to be like God. He was lacking the ability to create worlds. God created a world, but how did God create the world? He used the Torah. And what did He do with the Torah? He gave it to us. Whose Torah is it? Is it God's Torah or is it our Torah? Well, it's kind of a little bit of both.
Well,
We study...
it to us, so it's ours.
Exactly, but we study God's Torah. Yeah, He gave it to us. He formulated it. But then He gave it to us. The verse in Deuteronomy tells us, Lo bashamayim hi. The Torah is not in the heavens. The Torah is here. It's ours. The Talmud says, the angels go over to God and say, "God, when's Rosh Hashanah?" Which is kind of a question a lot of Jews ask. Right? When's Rosh Hashanah? We have to plan our annual trip to the synagogue. Unfortunately, that's a reality today. Angelic talk from modern Jews. But the Talmud says the angels come and ask God, when's Rosh Hashanah? Do you know what the Almighty says? I don't know. We have to ask the Jewish people. The Jewish people decide when Rosh Hashanah is. We have the Torah, and we can almost do with it what we please, which sounds bizarre. Of course, there are certain regulations within which we need to operate. But the Talmud tells a fantastic story in Baba Metzia 59b of a disagreement amongst the rabbis. And the disagreement centers around the purity status of a certain oven. Tanur shel achnai. It was a certain serpentine-shaped oven. And a question with regards to the purity status of that oven. And they brought up this question in the house of scholarship, and there was a disagreement. And one rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, the greatest rabbi of his generation, he gets up and he says, "This is the halacha." And the rest of the rabbis say, "No, we disagree with you. This is not, no, the opposite is the halacha." And they start duking it out. Ultimately, it comes up to a vote. And he loses. But, of course, he was a very feisty person. We can learn about Rabbi Eliezer as well, put him on our list. Very feisty person. And he says, "I'm not giving up." So he makes a proclamation. "If I'm right, let heaven announce it." And they're sitting in the Beis Medrash, and they hear a booming prophetic voice. Rabbi Eliezer is right. From heaven, prophecy. Everyone's impressed, right? Wrong. Lo b'shamayim hi. The Torah is not in the heavens. We don't care almost what God wants. Which sounds, of course, heretical. How can we not care what God wants? But there is a process. And the process is, achrei rabim lahatos. When the Sanhedrin rules, that becomes Torah. We are partners with God in creating the world. We use Torah to create the world. God, of course, contributed to that. We contribute to that as well. Which sounds astonishing.
Does it still work or it doesn't really work?
That's a good question. But let's finish to continue the story. He says to them, okay, you're not impressed by that? Listen to this. They will go outside, brings them all outside. And he says to them, you see the river flowing? If I'm right, let the river start flowing the opposite direction. And lo and behold, it starts flowing the opposite direction. They say, it doesn't matter. He points to a tree. If I'm right, the tree is going to be uprooted and moved 100 yards in that direction. The tree gets unrooted, no big deal. Finally, he says, if I am right, let the walls of the Beis Medrash cave in. Let the walls of the house of study cave in. And before you know it, the walls start caving in from all different directions. So another one of his contemporaries starts praying to have it stopped. So the walls kind of stopped halfway. Because they didn't want to go all the way down, and they couldn't go all the way back up because there was this conflict amongst the scholars. Ultimately, this story ended tragically because he refused to acquiesce, and they ended up putting him in chayrim. They ended up excommunicating him. For the rest of his life, he was a pariah. Rabbi Eliezer. But either way, this story is a very...
No, I didn't get it. Why did they excommunicate him?
Because he refused to accede to them. He refused to accept their ruling, and he refused to accept the ruling of the Sanhedrin. Despite the fact that he was arguably a greater scholar than all of them. And,
One ruling on what?
Oh, this particular law.
Oh, okay, so he disagreed. He thought that
Yes.
God should decide.
No, he thought he was right, and he said, I've God on my side. But either way, this kind of, I think, elevates the status of Torah and really the status of Torah scholarship as well. When we study Torah, we're doing something that the angels cannot do. We're doing something that Adam wanted more than anything else to do. When we study Torah, we kind of continue the creation of the world. The Greeks were always making the argument that the world is static. It always was, always will be, and it's finite, it's fixed. And the Jews, thousands of years already, have been arguing that we live in a dynamic world, a changing world, a world that had a beginning and has a conclusion, but there's development in the interim. The Torah is like that as well. Of course, there are fixed premises in the Torah, but the idea of our contribution to Torah, we can say a Torah insight, and we create a spiritual reality that will exist forever.
So is studying the Torah part of Tikkun Olam?
Absolutely. And we already mentioned that prior. But of course, studying Torah is part of Tikkun Olam. Because we're actually creating a perfect world, but it's kind of in the literal, in the spiritual sense. I'll give you another example of this, kind of how the literal spiritual world can actually converge onto the physical world. The Talmud tells of these two scholars that every Friday afternoon would study together. What would they study? Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation. This book is purported to have been written by Abraham. I think we still have copies of it today. I don't think I would really know what to do with it. Yeah, you have a copy. Excellent. You have a copy. It's not meant for lay people. If the Rambam was written for lay people, this was not written for lay people. And they studied this every Friday afternoon. And when they studied it, they also created a calf. And they would slaughter the calf and eat it for Shabbos. Every Shabbos they would have fresh meat that they got out of an animal that they created with studying Torah. This is the Talmud in Sanhedrin 60. It means literally the word studying Torah has the capacity to create the world, much less one species or one animal. That's should be no big deal, right?
Just shows up.
You're skeptical, I see, Howard.
Okay. No kidding.
Well, me too.
Well, I'm saying it's hard for us to imagine. But the idea of the Torah being like I said, this really changes our perspective in the world. I have a quote here. This is from the Ibn Ezra. He says like this. He says, "Those whose minds are empty will wonder, what did Moses do on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights? But they will understand that even if Moses was standing there thousands of times longer and was studying for just, for as long as you can imagine, he wouldn't understand 1/1000th of God himself. And certainly, then he quotes a verse. The verse says that Moshe tells God, you started showing me a little bit. You started. Like all of Torah, that's just one little drop in the ocean of God. But even that one drop in the ocean, we talked to kids today who finished their bar mitzvah studying, and they're like, well, I've done it all, right? I've mastered it all.
I know somebody like that.
It's like, I've spent 6 Wednesday nights for a half hour, and now I'm done. I can retire. And then the people that spend their entire life studying Torah, they talk about what they grasp in Torah as being a drop in the bucket, or even a drop in the ocean. So, it changes the perspective of what Torah is. If Torah is the blueprint for creating everything, just last week, there was a study that was published about a new estimation of how many species exist in the world. You want to see this story? This story? Previously, the number was estimated between 1.25 and 8.7 million different species. And
Exist today.
Yes. And last week, they published a new study that puts that number around 1 trillion. So not 1 billion, and certainly not in the millions, in the trillions, which obviously is astounding. But imagine, if I had to write a manual how to create a cell, how long would that manual be? How vast would that manual be? Or how to create an organ, or how to create a species, or how to create, certainly, our universe. And how big of a manual would that be? And we have a Torah that has the capacity to scale to those, astronomical sizes. Somehow the Torah, we're told, is the blueprint for this all. And we have a capacity to tap into that. When we tap into that, we create for ourselves a little world as well. I know sounds kind of very...
How would you determine in the Torah that was true, what they're now claiming to be true?
What do you mean?
How many species there?
Well, I'm just kind of giving a picture of the scope of the world that we live, that was formed by Torah, and thus kind of to try to amplify or to augment our perspective of what Torah is capable of, and how our contribution to Torah creates an element, a spiritual element that lasts forever.
What is a soul? I mean, there was a discussion. I remember at some point that...
What is a soul?
They could now, with artificial intelligence, artificial neural network, they could create sort of like an intelligence, a human being with that intelligence. And if they have like somebody like even a Jewish rabbi, they can gradually start replacing his neurons or his organs with artificial thing, and after a while, there's nothing left there but just mechanical things. Is the soul gone?
So you're referring to what's known as the singularity, the idea of artificial intelligence kind of eclipsing human intelligence, and thus the human experience can kind of exist as if you could kind of, this is science fiction, right? Right now, it's still science fiction. We'll see where that goes. But
there's a specific question. If we take a human being and we start replacing his body parts gradually, one by one over the years as he ages, and eventually we'll have replaced everything. So that's no longer a human being originally, but is that still the soul still attached to that?
Okay, well, let me reformulate your statement.
That's called death.
No, because
You can't
your cells that comprise your body are different cells than comprised your body yesterday.
Yeah.
Because the Almighty created the body in a way that it repairs itself all the time, and thus cells are swapped away for new cells. If you take on a molecular level a human body and you look at it from the way it was 7 years ago to the way it is today, 98% of the cells are different.
Right.
So, and I think that to me is indicative of the idea of a body just being merely a placeholder for the soul. Mm-hmm. You know, a common question people ask when we talk about reincarnation is, well, which body do you have? And that question assumes that you have one body. And we know already today that you don't have one body. It's just your cells are constantly being recycled.
Is that we have something entirely synthetic, made of silicon. It still holds the soul.
Well, my point is that, and by the way, there's an exception to that. Your brain cells don't get swapped out, which is the Almighty's gift to us, because otherwise we would forget everything.
Well, we can replace all of that too.
Oh, we can't. We can't replace brain cells.
Yeah, we can do. I mean.
Either way.
Wait a second. What are we saying here?
I don't know. We're going off topic. We're going off topic.
Does anybody understand what we're saying?
Yes, and that to me that is indicative of the role of the body. It's just nothing more than a place of the soul.
They actually have read that. They actually have done that. They replaced some parts of the brain with some artificial.
Maybe. Let's get back to our topic at hand. I want to finish this quickly. So I want to look at some examples of people in history that have kind of achieved Torah, and by dint of their achieving Torah, achieved mastery over the world. Because if the world is created with Torah, thus you get the master key of the world, and you can manipulate it. We find many stories, even after prophecy hath been concluded, we find stories of great Torah luminaries reviving dead people, for example. There's a Gemara that talks about Rabbi Yochanan. Not Rabbi Yochanan. I'm sorry. It was Rabbi Yosef ben Uziel. Whenever he studied Torah, and a bird flew over him, the bird would get incinerated. He had total mastery over the Gemara tells stories about Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, he would look at people and he'd be upset at them. They would be just combust. And this is kind of obviously this seems a little bit out there. I read a story today. Okay, the story is about Rabbi Akiva Eger, who was a rabbi in Europe, in Posen, who died in 1837. So it's relatively recent, still 200 years ago. There was a person in his town that was sick, and of course, as the rabbi of town, he would go visit the person. The person's very sick. Doctors say we don't know what to do with him. And he finds out concurrently that the king's doctor happens to be passing by in the town. So he sends someone to get him. He brings the king's doctor. The king doctor examines him and says, sorry, there's no help for this guy. There's no way to cure his illness. There's no antidote for this. He is history. Rabbi Akiva Eger tells him, well, okay, you're the king's doctor. What would you tell the king if he had the same illness? So the doctor says, well, it's interesting you ask, because if many years ago the king actually did have the same illness. And we discovered that there's only one antidote for this illness. There's a really rare bird that's only found in a certain tropical, or not tropical, a certain arid desert climate. And it doesn't appear very often, but if you capture that bird and you give the patient to eat from the meat of that bird, then they'll get cured. Problem is that when we had the problem with the king, he sent legions and legions of soldiers, and eventually they captured it, and they saved him. But you're some old Jew. Right? You have no chance. Goodbye, you're toast. So he left. And Rabbi Akiva started praying to the Almighty. And he said to him, listen, this guy, right, this king, he got a cure for himself because he's the king. But you know who's the king of all kings? God. And you know who's God's children? It's us. So he pleaded to the Almighty to try to help this king, so to speak, this Jewish person. He finishes praying, and they hear a tapping sound on the window. They look and they see a bird that none have ever seen on the windowsill. They go get the bird. The Rabbi Akiva instructs them to clip the wings of the bird, so he has the wings as a testament to this miracle. They cook the bird and they give it to him, and he gets better.
Well, when was this supposedly? What are we talking about?
Okay, either way, so we could argue with the historicity of the story. This is not so long ago, and it's a documented story. So I don't know exactly what year, but we're talking about 200 years ago. Fairly recently. To me, I don't question the story, or at least the story can happen. I'll tell you another story. This I know because this happened within the past 15 years. There was someone who was arguably the greatest Torah scholar alive today, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, who lives in Israel. He was studying a very obscure part of Torah that deals with a certain variety of grasshoppers. We know the grasshoppers are kosher, but there's so many different varieties of them, we don't know which one's which. That's why Sephardic communities still have customs, they still have traditions to which ones are kosher or not. Some of them still eat it. Bon appetit, of course. So he was studying this, and he didn't know he couldn't understand exactly what the anatomy of this particular grasshopper was. And he's studying, he's trying to understand, and as he's studying on his page, a grasshopper jumps on his page. And he's able to examine it. That's a story that's documented. There's hundreds of these stories. This person's around alive today. And you go to him, every time you see him, he's surrounded by 20 people. So like these stories that come, that come out of his household are that's just one story. That's like happens every other week. How's that possible? Well, if you study all of Torah like he does every single year he finishes all of Torah. What does all of Torah mean? Babylonian Talmud, of course, all the books of the Tanakh, all the commentaries of the Tanakh, Babylonian Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud, Sifra Sifrim Chol Torah Shonim, all the Ram, all Shulchan Aruch, all the Torah, everything. Every single year he finishes it. Not only that, when there's a leap year, so there's an extra month in the year, right? He writes a book on Jewish scholarship that month. So every leap year we know there's a new book coming out for him because he has an extra month to work. And I'm saying, like someone told me over the holiday, over Pesach, that Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky wrote. There's some guy who's writing a book about Jewish names. So Rabbi Chaim says, "Okay, you know what I'll do for you? I'll write for you a list of every single Jewish name in all of Jewish writings. Not only that, I'll do it in alphabetical order. So all the names of the Tanakh, all the hundreds of names of the Tanakh, all the names of the Talmud, the hundreds of rabbis and Jewish women that are mentioned in the Tanakh, all the different names, I'll write down for you, hundreds and hundreds of names, alphabetical order. Like, it's just unbelievable. Someone like that, who dedicates their life to Torah study, doesn't waste a single second, they have the master key to the world. Of course, if they need to know what the anatomy of a grasshopper looks like, the grasshopper is bound by the laws of nature, of Torah nature, to go and jump up on his book. What happens when we study Torah? I just want to quickly finish here because I am committed to finishing this today. I'll quickly wrap up here. The Talmud says as follows. It quotes a verse here. that someone who toils, someone else toils for him. The Talmud says, what does this mean? Hu amel b'makom zeh, v'torasa omelos b'makom acher. If someone toils in Torah study here, the Torah toils on his behalf elsewhere. Says Rashi, the Torah, as if the Torah itself intercedes upon his behalf and beseeches the Creator to take care of him and to give him the secrets of Torah. When we study Torah, we gain allies. The Talmud says that when we study Torah, we're protected and saved. Says the Talmud, life is like a human walking in the desert at night. What happens? You're scared of the various kinds of thorns and branches you could trap, you could fall over. You're scared of ditches in the road, ditches anywhere. You can't see, it's pitch dark. You're scared of predators, of animals that can come rip you to shreds. And you're also scared of thieves, of marauders, of conquistadors, people that are roaming around that could injure you. And lastly, you have no idea which way you're going. So you have a lot of problems. So we're in this world, it's dark, and we have no idea where we're going. Says the verse, Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or. The mitzvah is a candle. You have a candle, you have a little bit of light. The Torah is light. The Torah is like the sun. When you have the Torah, you don't worry about where it's daylight. You're not worried about tripping. You know which direction you're going. You're not worried about the marauders. You're not worried about the animals, the predators. Right? Torah gives us guidance in the world. And lastly, and with this we shall conclude. When we study Torah, we become joyous. The Torah is Rabbi's mesamche lev. It delights, it gladdens the heart. We know that on Tisha B'Av, the day of mourning for the Jewish people, the national day of mourning, that we are prohibited to eat and drink, but we're also prohibited to study Torah. It's the one day of the year that we're not allowed to study Torah, and the reason why is because Torah makes us happy, it delights us. And I think now that we have enumerated 25 different reasons why we study Torah and the benefits that are accrued to us individually, to the world, to Tikkun Olam, collectively, over the past 11 discussions that we've had on the issue, I think it becomes very clear indeed why Torah is such a joyous activity. So I think we hopefully... I'm sorry?
Could you please give a handout for this? Like
Sure. I can make a handout for that. So I think we have sufficiently addressed the question as to why we study Torah. Of course, a lot is yet to be uncovered. What Torah is, who wrote it, what's the authorship, what are the various questions that have been raised on those issues, what's the oral Torah, why was it oral, why was it not written. Really try to delve into this in kind of a way that, in an advanced way to try to really understand what's going on. And we hope to do that next week. And I thank you all for coming and for listening, and I look forward to continuing our journey together.
Thank you. Thanks, Rabbi. Rabbi, I have a question just